Okay, good evening. Let's get started. My name is Barrett Jones, and tonight's webinar is Recording and Mixing Digital Music. Those of you who have heard previous webinars by me know that usually the format is where I spend a few minutes talking about my own program, Beat Club, and then I usually go on to a series of videos to demonstrate whatever the topic is. Well, tonight actually we're going to do something different. Uh, it's going to be mostly a demo on my desktop of using uh, GarageBand, which is an onboard editing software for Mac. So most of this evening will be spent talking in that realm. But first, a few slides to introduce myself and what I do. I run an organization called Beat Club, which is a portable digital music workshop. I bring Beat Club to libraries, community centers, schools, museums in the DC area. I founded Beat Club in 2011. I was looking for a number of different things. I wanted a program that taught music. I wanted to reach youth, and I wanted to have something that was accessible to both beginners and more advanced players. And so I came up with this system, which I call Beat Club, which are a series of Korg Chaos pads um, linked together through a mixer. The students or the kids or whoever's playing gets to use different instruments to produce all kinds of different sounds. In many of my webinars, I talk about specific pieces of equipment and how they interact with each other. So if you're interested in specifics on the Chaos pads, Chaoslators, other pieces of equipment, go and take a look at my previous talks. Um, Tonight's talk is about recording and mixing, and that's really because the final product of Beat Club is an MP3, which I provide to the whoever my client is. Um, so the final point in Beat Club is recording the digital music, and that's why tonight that's the topic I'm covering, because I've covered basically all the other components and setting them up and conducting them. I'm also talking about mixing and editing because it is envisioned as being something that's going to be part of a curriculum that I'm working on developing, where we train kids, actually probably more teens, to run their own bee clubs. And part of that more extensive training involves um, learning how the basics of how to record and mix on a computer. So the focus tonight is going to be running through the essentials of what you need to know if you want to record to any to a laptop or a desktop computer. Okay. I should mention here that I work a lot with the DC Public Library. I bring this workshop is really come as a partnership with the DC Public Library and their attempts to reach out to the youth in the city. Ordinarily, teens are a rare demographic in libraries, and so the DC Public Library has made a real effort to reach out to teens and invite programs in, such as mine and other worthy programs in the DC region, to try to bring the arts and technology to everyone in all communities throughout the DC area. And so this curriculum that I'm talking about in terms of the uh, the potential training of many young men and women, will ultimately uh, work best with partnerships such as with the DC Public library. So stay tuned for further webinars about how that progresses. In the meantime, a little overview of the equipment that I bring to Beat Club. In my ordinary setup, I use a couple of key oscillators, a KSPad Quad, a microphone, and then a Mackie mixer and a Lucas Nano speaker system. In the setup that is Beat Club, you can see here the key oscillators are aligned up along with the KSPad Quad, which is running the microphone. Those all come into the mixer. The output goes to the speakers, but then the point we're focusing on tonight is the mixer and to the computer. And here's just an overview of how this same schematic is presented, only using the different instruments that are emphasized in this workshop. So let's talk about recording as it is as it pertains to this setup of Beat Club. And essentially, regardless of what you're doing, the big challenge for digital recording is to get a digital signal. Now, if you're working with digital instruments, that's no problem. You can plug in, for example, a USB keyboard directly into a laptop and use it to trigger GarageBand. But what I'm going to do tonight is talk specifically about how I do the recording and how I get sound into GarageBand, which is the application that I use. So the first thing that you should know is about USB. There's 4 different types of USB connections. The one that comes into your computer is the type A. The thing to be aware of is that in my setup, I use a Mackie mixer that has a type B connection on the back of the mixer. So look when you are using a mixer, look and see if on the back it has a type B or any kind of USB connection. Because that will allow you to use this mixer to patch in different instruments and have them seamlessly work with the software on your computer. Otherwise, there are other ways of converting a signal from analog to digital, or to get any kind of signal into recording software. There's various types of converters out there. They run the gamut from $30 to hundreds of dollars. This is an example of just one type. But you'll need some way to connect to the computer. Now, as I said earlier, I use this particular model actually of Mackie mixer, which allows for USB connection to go directly to the hard drive of my computer. So I can both record from this mixer, I can also play back from the computer through the mixer with the USB connection. And there it is on the back of the mixer. So this is the way that I'm getting sound into the computer. I have a short demo film here that we'll take a look at just to show a little tour of the mixer. You can see here on the left-hand side various devices that are playing. Those are all being input, one per channel. So I use this mixer to do a lot of the mixing before I even record. It's up to your preference. You can do all your mixing on a laptop, I actually prefer to use a mixer. So there you have an example of essentially how you can use a mixer and to mix in sound input uh, before it even gets to the software. But now we're going to switch over to the demo mode because we have quite a lot to cover, and so I want to get into actually taking a look at how some tips and tricks in the editing software. So I'm actually going to now jump over to GarageBand, where I've set up a number of tracks. Now, I know that everybody has different types or different versions of software. I know this is an old version of GarageBand. There are newer versions. There's equally robust versions of software out there, many different kinds. I can say from my own experience that all of this software essentially works the same. Um, and the things I show you tonight, we could spend the entire time just talking about the features in GarageBand. I don't take advantage of all those features. I really just use the software to get done some basic cuts and edits. And so that's what I want to emphasize in tonight's talk. So you can see the screen here. Each one of these represents a track. I've preloaded these tracks, dragged them in, just to illustrate how that would work. Here, these are all Beat Club recordings from various sessions, and here, for example, I could take this file that has an MP3 extension, drag it in here. Notice how it appears now as a new track. So that's how I loaded all these different files um, in that same method of just dragging and dropping in. Doesn't matter if they're MP3, WAV, AFF, the editor will take them all. If I was to be recording directly from a device, if I was going to do a live recording, I would do a new track and I would say real instrument. And then you can see here, actually you can see how it's some slight green is showing in the levels. That's actually the microphone on my laptop picking up my voice. But essentially you would monitor these levels here so that they wouldn't get too high, they wouldn't go into yellows or reds when you did a recording, and it would show up as another one of these tracks. Let's take a look at some basics about editing, some essentials. First of all, each one of these is a separate track, and so when you're working on a track, you want to be working on the track that is highlighted. So for example, let's work on SE4. So now we're in SE4 track. You can see that the track has changed color, indicating we're now working in that track. Come over to the actual file. You can move the files around on the timeline. But what we want to do is take a look actually a little bit deeper. So there's a couple ways to do that, a couple of different views. First view is to use this slider so we can get a more in-depth look at the actual file. And then we can get a real close-up. We can double click on it. It'll open up this pane and show the actual waveform. So let's have a listen to what this is. These are some kids playing with synthesizers. Okay, so I will take you through the steps that I would normally do for recording, and these are the ones that I found have been time tested to be the most successful way to get a good quality sound. So once the clips are on the timeline, I don't spend too much time worrying about how they're going to line up. We can do that later. But I go in and maybe try to find first of all, have a playthrough and work um, on the different levels and sound levels. So let me show you how that works. We'll hop over to this button. Take a look at edit here. And we want to bring up a graphic equalizer. Now, regardless of whether it's GarageBand, I'm going to turn this off for a minute. Regardless of whether it's GarageBand or any other application, a graphic equalizer is your friend. And the more robust a graphic equalizer, in other words, this is a 31 band graphic equalizer, the better. And so look in any application that you're working in, GarageBand, Audacity, any one of them, find the graphic equalizer, because this is where you can transform a mediocre recording into a great recording. So let's have a listen now. Let's listen to this track as it is. And we'll start. Emphasizing different parts of the spectrum. So this can sound dramatically different than that. You can emphasize bass frequencies too. So I'm using the computer speakers, so the sound quality isn't really that good, but I really want to emphasize, though, simply the matter that for every track that you're working with, the first thing you want to do is take a look at it through a graphic equalizer, because you'll be able to, I was making some extreme changes here, but you'll be able to make some minor tweaks and adjustments that'll really bring out different aspects of the track. The graphic equalizer is definitely your friend. While we're in this pane here on the application, I want to take a look too, talk about some other frequently used effects. A lot of people put a little bit of flanger on a track. It's not going to be so apparent in these tracks because these are pretty overdriven tracks. But for more subtle music, a lot of times people use a flanger. Also, things to be aware of is on many tracks, there's the option here for adding reverb, and adding a little bit of reverb or even quite a lot of reverb, depending on your taste, really alter the sound. Let's get to something that works better. You can make quite a different mood. Reverb, not reverb. So changing the EQ, adjusting the reverb, maybe using some echo, maybe using a flanger. Those simple tools, those basic things can dramatically change the quality of a track that you're working on. Okay, let's take a look at a couple of tricks also that I use a lot in terms of if I find a particular part of a track that I know I'm going to want to come back to. Sometimes there's different ways to do it. I prefer to split the track right at that point. So, for example, let's take a listen through one of this. Let's listen to SE3 here. Here's a nice one. So what I do is I go to split, and what happens here is that now I have a segment of the track that I can separate out from the rest of the track. I have this first little segment here. Back up. So I have a marker there, or essentially the split will allow me to move this piece around. And so I don't have to make a decision about, oh, I'm going to delete the rest of this, but I can just have this split to know that I've isolated a portion of the music that I may want to work with some more. Now in this instance, I'm actually going to get rid of the rest of it to then go on and talk about a couple of other things you can do in terms of working with these specific tracks. I'm going to make the size a little bit bigger so we can see this better. So now I've isolated here in SE3 a little piece of one of the tracks. So actually now I see, well, maybe there's even a better piece here. So I'll do split, and I'll get rid of, whoops, exactly what you don't want to do. Sorry. I'll get rid of the rest of it here, and then I'll go back, listen to it again. And I know just that I want this nice consistent set here, so I'm going to do oops, make sure I have this selected, and then I'll do another split, and I'll get rid of that. So now I just have this little clip, which is going to take us to the next part of, whoops, my bad. That's to actually adjust the master track, which is something we're not going to do at this point. So now I'll take us to the next part of our talk, which is mixing. And here, in the example that I've been talking about, the mixing really has gone on, most of it on the mixer before it even arrives in the software. But I do want to talk about how you can also do a lot of mixing in the software. Here's a little piece that we just created. And so let's actually take this and start to loop it now beneath one of the other tracks. Let's give it a little more distinctive character. Kind of a crazy treble-y sound. And then we'll bring the other track back in. Let's try another quick edit here. Do another split on this track. Get rid of that part. now I have a loop, and I can arrange other tracks. Maybe bring the levels way down on the track. Have a little bit of it. Have SE3 as the beat as most of the emphasis. This is where you can make decisions. Oftentimes the tracks will get too crowded, but no matter what you're working with, you're going to have these same different components, individual tracks. Always plan on having separate tracks for each instrument or separate tracks for each concept, because you want to be able to, how in these separate tracks we've been working on having different EQs and other different kinds of effects. You want to have the instruments as separate as possible. So voices on one track, drums on another track, synths on another track. Split them up as much as possible. There's also some tricks you can use in terms of fading in and out. It's not always necessary to have a fade in and fade out, but it is sometimes a really effective way, especially fading out. So in this particular software, I just choose fade out. I establish a timeline, or on the linear bar, I find a specific point in the timeline where I want to begin the fade out. I find a second point and drag this down to 0, and so now I can have a fade out. Now let's say that you're done and you want to go, now you're finished and you want to export your file. I recommend using compressing to an MP3. Uncompressed file is better sound quality, but it's ultimately, if you're going to do something like load it up to the web, it's not as good an idea as using an MP3 encoder. MP3 is pretty much the universal standard, as it explains here, and it's a smaller file size. So pretty much all the time you want to export as an MP3, unless you're going to be working on it again or you want to move it to another computer, in which case you don't want to compress it, because you do lose a certain amount of quality when you compress the file. So we're heading into the last few minutes of the talk, and I wanted to jump back quickly over to the PowerPoint. The demo will go into more details in further presentations, but for now I wanted to bring up this final screen, and just to summarize, essentially what we wanted to emphasize today is not so much, not so much the individual product as sort of the workflow that would go on in terms of editing, and it's a long road to figuring out the specifics of a particular software system, but it's pretty easy to do some of the simple edits and the simple tricks that I showed you in tonight. And so if you have any comments or questions, please drop me a line, barrett@dcbclub.com. And later this month we're going to be talking about how to distribute the music on the web, sites that are good for distributing and sharing music, your own music, on the web. And so that's kind of the final outcome, thinking, well, the recording and the mixing has now been done, the file's been exported, now you want to share it. So that's what we'll look at later in the month. Stay tuned for that. So thank you for your time and have a good evening. Good night.